Hello again. Thanks very much for joining us. This is Pamela Passman. I see a number of you are both logged into the website, which shows you a slide deck as well as the audio. I'm joined today by my colleague, Alan Dixon, and we're quite pleased that we have participants really from around the world, many time zones represented, so thank you to those who are staying up late and those who got up early. And we have a number of participants from Brazil, and we thank our partner in Brazil, ECHCO, for co-hosting the webinar with us today. We have what I think is a very, very timely topic. It's difficult to read the news any day and not see issues around cyber security, cyber theft discussed. So we will start with just really sort of recapping some of the key data points that help us keep this issue really front and center. Some of these data points were included in the invitation for this webinar, but the issue continues to grow. It's a very challenging issue in that often most companies do not know when they've been subject to a data breach, the loss of valuable and sensitive corporate information. We continue to see companies that are not aware of what resources they should prioritize to secure, where those resources are, who has access to them. Very large percentage of companies are concerned about their inability to protect their intellectual property or confidential customer data. And increasingly, this is a key issue for boards of directors. Many view their role as critical to the oversight of this issue, yet they don't feel they have the technical expertise on the issue, and they don't believe that the issue is being discussed enough at the board level. So really, those are just some data points on the issue at large, but we also wanted just to include a few because we know we have a number of people from Brazil joining us today. This issue, I think, plays out in Brazil as it does in many countries. Very significant rise in the number of breaches that organizations everywhere from government agencies, corporations, nonprofit organizations, universities, are impacted by data breaches. Like in most countries, the greatest threat, and we'll talk about this more, is the insider threat. Employees, contractors, suppliers, those individuals that have access to your network. And the top industries impacted in Brazil, for example, the service industry, technology, and as I mentioned, government. And then just a sense of the root causes of data breach. Certainly, malicious or a criminal attack is significant, as well as just information technology system glitches, and of course human error, which usually involves insiders, employees. We thought it would be helpful to just frame the issue by thinking and talking about the experience that Sony had, because we think it's really redefined how to think about, what information, what data can be breached, lost, or compromised for a company. I think most people thought about, intellectual property, trade secrets, sensitive PII, sensitive financial data, but the Sony example really highlighted for everyone that almost every employee's data can be subject to a breach, and the whole range of corporate information, which we now call corporate digital assets. In the Sony situation, it was actually their products and services, their films and scripts, that they did not want yet to be released into the public domain that were released. Their business plans, of course, their intellectual property and trade secrets, their confidential and private information related to the negotiation of contracts with talent and directors and producers, a whole host of email from across the organization impacting many, many employees. And of course, confidential employee information, social security numbers, passport numbers, performance reviews, medical information, a whole host of financial data that actually impacted the timing of the release of financials by the parent company. And of course, a whole range of customer, vendor, and third-party proprietary and confidential information. A whole host of information, that again impacted every organization within the Sony, as well as almost every employee. So while we may focus on what we think are, the trade secrets or the intellectual property, which represents a huge percentage of the value of a company, the opportunity for all different kinds of information that is both sensitive and confidential to be breached is quite significant. And when you look at the cost of a breach to a situation like Sony, it is very, very significant. The disclosure and loss of the intellectual property and all the other information, will impact Sony in a variety of ways. Its negotiation strategy, the kinds of offers that it makes to its talent and the other kinds of individuals that it works with, its reputation, relationships. It's had a huge impact on its employee relations. Employees have brought lawsuits against Sony because of the disclosure of their personal information. The operations and business continuity, not only was some of their information exposed to the public, it was actually destroyed. Very significant amounts of employee information as well as business information was destroyed. And of course, the financial and legal repercussions. As I mentioned, Sony had to delay the release of its financial information because it didn't have access. It no longer had access to certain financial information and had to rebuild it. We're going to go through the slides and then we're going to open it up for questions, so please do keep in mind your questions. There's the questions function that you can begin to list your questions, and as we see them we can also answer them, or if you want to wait to the end, that's fine too. So now we're going to look a little bit at the threat landscape and how does a company really understand why there is this rise of corporate digital assets and how it impacts their operations and their business more specifically. So as we look at the environment, we see a number of factors that are driving an increase in IP theft and data breaches. A highly globalized marketplace where suppliers, customers, competitors are in many different countries with very different legal regimes and cultural norms. We've got fragmented value chains, very complex and fragmentation of supply, distribution, and value chains. There's limited follow-up to find out the capacity of business partners, generally beyond the first tier. Relationships are based on contractual terms with little or no sense of the capacity of business partners to protect intellectual property, to protect sensitive data. No real sense of the competency of business partners in terms of securing their networks, how they train their employees on responsible actions in terms of how they access a network. And you have a very mobile workforce. First, you have employees that are spread out around the world. You have technical talent and other employees who are changing jobs and changing companies very frequently. And then you have employees using multiple devices to access corporate information. So you have a very mobile workforce in terms of changing jobs, as well as access to networks using multiple devices. And of course, information digitization. Companies now can maintain so much data. The cost of data storage is very low, so companies are not going through the process of prioritizing and classifying their information. So they know what's most important, and they then can put their resources behind securing the most important information. So you have large amounts of information, You have limited use of access controls, and so the ability of insiders in particular to access information and take information is quite significant. And for most companies, whether it's an IP theft or a data breach of customer information, financial information, they often present similar challenge. There's a very significant delay in even discovering that there's been a theft or a breach. In some cases, companies get some kind of hint that something has happened, but often overlook it and don't follow up. And that certainly was the situation in the Sony case, where senior leaders of the company did get some emails and some indications that something was going to happen, but didn't follow up on it. And often an outsider discovers the breach, not somebody in the company. Again, you might hear from that outsider about it, and you've got to listen to that and follow up. And a majority of companies keep their security breaches or thefts under wraps. They don't share that information publicly. They don't share it with law enforcement. They don't share it with others in their industry. And so it really makes it difficult to really follow up on these challenges and for law enforcement to have a comprehensive view of what's happening. And also we find that the roles and responsibilities inside of a company to address these issues is also unclear. So let's then look at the threat landscape. And this is really, I think, a good outline overall, but of course for each company the threat landscape will be different. As we see across the environment, there are a number of threat actors acting for different gains, for different objectives. You may hear and see a lot about nation states. In fact, in the newspapers in the United States today, there's a lot about Iran and its increasing capabilities with respect to cyber threats. You will read about these cases, and certainly the Sony example is one. But current and former employees and business partners, what we call insiders, present the greatest risk. Some of them are being recruited by competitors and governments, but the vast majority of them are people that know the company. They understand what's most important that the company has. They know where it is, and they know how to access it. And while we refer to malicious insiders, there's also just a lot of careless or human error insiders that release information or take information unknowingly that has an impact on the business. And we'll talk about this more, but you can summarize the vulnerabilities as a failure in process, a failure in people, and a failure in technology. All of these different threat actors are engaged in cyber theft, but also traditional ways. They try to enter your facilities as a customer, as a vendor, as a joint venture partner. So while the very intense focus on cyber risks, we can't lose sight of the fact that there's very traditional ways to also misappropriate sensitive information. And you really do need to assess the risks and determine which of these threats pose the greatest danger and must be considered a high security priority. Who would want to harm your organization and why? How would these threat actors exploit the vulnerabilities? How would they breach your security? So many companies are focused on the security perimeter. They've built a giant wall around their network, and some have layers of security. But we more and more need to assume that the organization will be breached, which leads to really more of a focus on identity management. Do the right people have access to the right information in the right way? We do want to highlight the malicious insider because, as we mentioned, this is, in most countries and for most organizations, the most significant risk. By far, the vast majority of litigation in the United States involving trade secrets involves insiders. And the typical motivation for a malicious insider can range from just disgruntled with their role in the company. They may sense that they are going to be terminated. They may sense that there's more opportunity outside of the company. So there's a variety of things that companies need to keep an eye out to ensure that they're watching their employees in a very proactive way. Certainly if there's a business change happening for the company, whether it's a merger, a divestiture, a pending reduction in forces, looking specifically at employees, that you have a termination plan around, several weeks prior to that. Often employees know that they are on a path to be terminated before they are told, and that's when the most significant malicious activity takes place. And of course, the importance of training your employees as you onboard them into the company about their role in protecting your intellectual property, your trade secrets, not bringing another company's trade secrets into your company, ongoing training as they are an employee, and the importance of an exit interview so that a HR official has a conversation, is trained to look for certain things to understand sort of the state of mind of the employee as he or she exits the company. So more and more companies are focused on how to use the exit interview to determine which employees they should really carefully scrutinize in terms of the possible misappropriation of confidential information, of trade secrets, of intellectual property. And we also just wanted to highlight the increasing concerns around supply chain or vendor third-party vulnerability. I think for many companies, the Target case was a big red flag in terms of how a vendor, a fairly small vendor that had access to Target's network to process monthly invoices, that vendor's credentials were used to enter into Target's network and when all the activity happened. And again, this is a great example of a small organization that was perceived by the bad actors as probably a very weak link and a very easy way to access into Target's network. More and more companies are quite focused in their contracts and in their engagement and their due diligence process for vetting suppliers to ensure that they are using the latest information security to better protect their credentials and their network. We've got a question about security standards, which we're actually going to be talking about a little bit later on, so I'm going to hold that one question. So let's keep moving, and I'm actually going to hand it over to Alan now.
Thanks, Pamela. I think I see the question we have here is about a particular aspect of the IT security, which we will get into. I'm going to be talking for the next few minutes about really the practical ways of how do you get started. If you're working for a company, or if you've got clients that have come to you and said, "Gee, we really have worries about our cyber assets, let's say, our secret formulas, our source code for our products, our know-how, things that are hugely valuable to our company and to our competitiveness." There's all kinds of cyber risks that we could be facing. So where do we get started on this? So we'll be talking a bit about the management systems approach. Some of you probably work with industries or with companies that are very familiar with management systems approaches, and that is to try to look at these things in an organized and holistic way. Not just having a quick fix of your IT system, but looking really at all the areas in your company where where your cyber assets, your trade secrets, your other confidential business information is at risk, and then addressing all of those areas where problems could arise, and putting in place systems so that it's not just a one-shot deal, but over time gets reviewed. If there's problems, those get fixed. The systems are improved so that over time, you're hopefully going to be able to protect your trade secrets and your assets even better a year from now than you do today. Management systems are used in a lot of areas, obviously, quality control, environmental compliance, let's say, labor compliance, things like this where, companies year in and year out have programs for putting in place protections internally and with their suppliers so that, for example, bribery, what kinds of policies do you have in place? What kinds of management systems do you have in place for year on year, following these issues, making sure you've got the protections in place you need, and it's a very effective way of doing this, and we put some of the reasons on this slide, but it really builds awareness among your employees, among your supply chain, what needs to be done, who needs to be doing what, and it's not just reactive, not just, I've been broken into, what do I do today, but proactively analyzes where you think the problems are going to be and then puts systems in place to reduce the chance of those problems actually happening. Another thing, the things we're talking about here with protecting cyber assets, so intellectual property and other business sensitive information, is that it's really hugely helpful in that you've probably got, or your clients probably have systems in place already that they're using in other aspects of their business. So if you've got a system for dealing with your suppliers that reviews things like quality, reviews things like labor practices year on year, these kind of cybersecurity issues, these kind of trade secrets, IP protection things can be put into those kind of systems and routines that are already in place rather than having to invent something new. So with respect to cybersecurity in particular, the kind of things I'm going to be highlighting here really could be called enterprise risk management. And again, for these kinds of digital assets breach, trade secrets, other IP theft, for example, there's really three main steps in getting an organized program in place for improving the protection of your cyber assets. So it's really first identifying what the risks are. We'll look at this in a little bit more detail. How serious are those risks? Again, you can't deal with every single tiny risk or every single risk that may not have much of an impact, but weighing up the likelihood of risk and the impact that risks can have. And then finally, putting in place specific things to manage the risks that your particular company or your particular client, may be facing with respect to this kind of cyber asset and cybersecurity breach. We've done actually with PricewaterhouseCoopers a very interesting report, which if you haven't seen, I'd highly recommend to you. It's on the create.org website, and this looks at sort of a high level of what's the economic impact of trade secrets throughout the economy, let's say, and goes into a bit more detail about the kinds of threat actors, who's trying to get your information. Pamela was talking about, and looks a bit at the future, but it has a very helpful sort of risk management framework in the paper to help companies look at what their trade secrets are and how to protect them. Again, a very helpful way of starting to plan these kind of things in a company. And again, just maybe I'm overselling the management systems approach, but the great thing is you get rid of silos on these issues. It's not just legal, or it's not just your your HR people, or it's not just your supply chain people that are dealing with these things, but anybody that's touching areas where there may be a cybersecurity breach is in contact with each other and are working together to deal with these kind of risks. We're going to look at prioritizing and ranking lists of trade secrets, which is something that is very important. If you don't know what it is you're protecting, the likelihood is that your IT system is probably not protecting it. Your management systems, your policies, your procedures are likely not protecting if you not really focus on what it is you're trying to protect. And putting in place these repeatable processes where you look over things over time. How's this working? What problems have we had? What can be fixed? And assessing the cost of trade secret theft as well. Is this going to be a tiny impact? Is this going to be a mega million impact? So these kind of really risk management systems we think can be hugely useful in protecting cyber assets as well. So the PwC and CREATE framework that I was mentioning in this report really is a 5-step process of identifying what the trade secrets are, looking at the particular risk from particular threat actors, ranking the importance and the risk of each trade secret, doing an economic analysis. Really, that's how much would this cost my company if this trade secret were stolen, and then really taking specific steps with respect to what you actually do in the company to protect the trade secrets and the other cyber assets. CREATE has developed an 8-category system and program of leading practices for protecting trade secrets and other IP at a company. And really what you're looking at here is the fact that there's 8, I would say, discrete or different types of areas within a company where these issues of cybersecurity come up. So it's not just the contracts. We lawyers like to think it's all in the contract, and once we've got that signed, it's fine. It's not just in the IT system. And again, I think if you talk to most IT directors, chief information officers, they would say, give me a few million, I'll get a better cyber wall around our company, and it'll all be fine. But there are many different areas in a company where these kind of security risks, cybersecurity risks come up, and it's not just in the legal and the IT area. So the CREATE leading practices have 8 categories: policies, procedures and records, policies for your employees, policies for contractors and suppliers, procedures. How do we actually identify what's a trade secret in our company? How do we, let employees or not disclose those kinds of trade secrets to other parties? What kind of records are we keeping as far as, what material we're managing on behalf of someone else? If we've entered into an NDA and we're holding the, crown jewels of some other company or dealing with them in our company, how are those records being kept? How do we know we're supposed to be protecting something? Again, this whole area of policies, procedures, and records, hugely important. Compliance team, and that's a question really of who's doing this. And my mantra is, if no one's in charge of this, nobody's doing it. And that is, the people that deal with this in every area of your company, whether it's legal, HR, finance, supply chain, sometimes manufacturing, sometimes marketing, people that are dealing with your most valuable cyber assets, your most valuable trade secrets, etc., need to be in communication with each other, and someone needs to be managing this whole process across the company such that there's not a weakest link in any of the departments. Risk assessment we talked about a bit, and that is identify what trade secrets you have, figure out the likelihood and the impact of a breach with respect to those assets, and then putting in place things like this that we're talking about what kind of risk assessment is going on at your company. Supply chain, again, hugely important. I've done a bunch of interviews with different companies about how they perceive their supply chain is dealing with their intellectual property and trade secrets. And then I've had the chance to talk to many supply chain companies, and I can tell you that the perception and the reality is often very different. If you send your most valuable company trade secrets to your supplier to manufacture or to do some other functions with, what do their employees know about keeping this confidential? How is that material being kept on their IT systems? How are your suppliers being given access or not to that information, what's happening at that level? So supply chain, hugely important area for managing well when it comes to digital assets. Security and confidentiality management, of course, that's IT, but that's also physical security. Are employees walking out the door with laptops that have your company's secret on it? Are there areas in the company where outsiders can come in and actually see these secrets that you don't want them to see? So lots of various things to be managed around security and confidentiality. And then there's just the practical things of training. Do your employees know what they're supposed to do? Do they know what trade secrets are? Do they know, how to use their computers in a secure way? Monitoring and measurement, again, this just is the management system aspect of, over time, reviewing how it's going in each of these areas. Is it better this year than last year? Is our supplier doing better now than he was a year ago? And then corrective actions and improvements when there are problems. Obviously, contingency planning, obviously dealing with problems as they come up, but not just being reactive, but looking at what the underlying problem was and fixing that and checking over time that the underlying issues are dealt with and improved. On the risk management, Create has put together actually a very nice report on intellectual property and risk management. And in the risk management area, obviously identify is step one. And we've put in this report, which is also on our website, by the way, the list of the kind of risks that you can have to trade secrets in particular. The areas where risks may well come up as far as having a trade secret stolen, and 10 or 15 different types of risks that you may be facing, with respect to trade secrets. So again, just a practical tool that you can look at and incorporate into your own planning. Dan, I'm looking at Dan's questions about this. So is having a ranked list of companies' trade secrets, the family jewels, and the location map of them on the network dangerous and just what the cyber attacker wants to make his job easier? Well, I guess the question is, you're going to have security for all of your, all of your trade secrets and all of your confidential information anyway. So again, I think that's a question for your own planning. Having a list on the network, may or may not be secure. You may want to keep that off the network. But as far as actually identifying what trade secrets you're working with, we do think that's hugely important, and that is, and when you get to the IT systems in particular, if you don't know what it is you're protecting, and I think if you ask many IT managers, okay, so what company secrets is your IT system specifically geared, specifically tooled to protect, they won't know. They may be protecting, generally, they may have a very good encryption system, may have very good access, but they don't know necessarily that, the particular source code to your product is what needs to be protected most, and, it needs to be segregated, this particular aspect on the network. It needs to be encrypted. It needs to be subject to certain rules about how employees can take that away. So I think it's more of a question. Yes, you do need good IT security, but you also need to know what the IT security is protecting. One of the interesting things we've done is we've advised and worked with a number of companies on these issues, and on our website, the Bertelsmann company called Arvato is a company that we worked with. They went through our program, and we did some independent evaluation with them and some discussion with them. They are obviously very sophisticated company. They have quite a good IT security. They are ISO 27001 compliant. But in going through the CREATE program and talking to us about how their system works, one of the things in the ISO 27001 spec is that your security needs to be based on the objectives that your specific company has. So it's not just a general security issue, but what is your specific objective or objectives for your security system? And as we're talking about here, one of the specific objectives should be to protect the specific trade secrets that you care most about. And you can see on our website, but the Arvato company was very forthcoming and said, this was hugely helpful working with CREATE and talking about these things. And, in implementing their 27001 compliance, they've taken these kind of things into account, modified their own systems, and, really found that this kind of management system approach to identifying what it is you're protecting and then implementing the protections is a really useful one. I think this just gets, it's more example of what we're talking about here, and that is, if you look at ISO 27001, which is one of the main ones, COBIT is another IT security standard, NIST has a standard it's put out, and a lot of companies are really looking hard at these things because they realize they've got security problems. If you look at the Federal Securities and Exchange reports of these companies, I put the Ford Motor Company one on here, but I would say 9 or 9.5 out of 10 of the major companies in the U.S. have disclosed in their securities disclosure that we are subject to risks of cyber attacks or theft of our IP or both. So, companies are really focusing on these industry standards, but as we say, the vulnerability here is that you do this in a vacuum without reference to the particular cyber assets that you're trying to protect. The 27001, if you read it, it's very general. It doesn't cover IP, it doesn't mention IP, it doesn't mention trade secrets. And so really you need to have those as specific objectives and build that in as your system is designed. And I think one of the questions we had here is, do security standards help or hurt cybersecurity? Cyber attacks are arsonists. Fire codes don't help much, may hurt. Bad guys know how it's designed and built. I think that's a fair comment. I think they help if they're implemented well, and that is, these were developed by smart IT people who know basically from start to finish how security systems work themselves, such that they are saying to those of us who are not security experts, well, if you design your IT system up to this particular standard, it will be a better protection than maybe if you did it yourself. The downside is, if it's done badly, and by badly I mean if it doesn't actually get built on the basis of the objectives we're talking about here, and that is the objective of protecting your particular trade secrets, then I don't know if it's counterproductive, but it's not going to provide any help unless you take those things into account. I think that's probably all from me at this point, but we can have more questions as we go on if you like. Let me turn back over to Pamela just to talk a bit about what Create's been doing in this area in particular.
Thanks very much, Alan. And let me just reiterate, if you have a question, there's the chat function, and please list a question, and we'd be very pleased to answer it. We have just a few more slides, and then we'll have an opportunity, of course, to answer any questions that you have. But we wanted to put this all in context and to describe how we work with companies. Create Leading Practices for IP Protection is a specific service that has 3 different parts to it. The first is a self-assessment. It's a secure online environment that a company enters into to answer a series of questions. And the questions are categorized into the 8 process categories that Alan outlined that are critical to securing your intellectual property, your trade secrets, and confidential information. And we ask a series of questions that then determines the level of maturity of a company in each of these 8 process categories. There's levels of maturity from 1 to 5, 5 being most mature, and the questions help us assess where a company is in each of these areas. As soon as the company completes its self-assessment, it gets its ratings and also benchmarking against other companies that have participated in Create Leading Practices. We then schedule a independent evaluation. We have experts around the world qualified in different languages to have a 60 to 90-minute conversation with the company. We ask a different series of questions, but with respect to the 8 process categories, again, understanding the level of maturity of a company in each of the 8 process categories. As soon as a company completes that, they then get a summary report from Create that outlines where the substantial gaps are, where the opportunities are for maturing the systems of the company. You get benchmarked in the independent evaluation against other companies that have also participated. And all this information really helps a company understand how to prioritize their approach to these issues, where they should be investing their time and resources within the 8 process categories to have the biggest benefit in terms of advancing its holistic approach to protecting its intellectual property and trade secrets and confidential information. We've also developed a substantial guide that helps the company work to increase the level of maturity in each of the process categories. So if you're a level 2, it gives outlines the steps you need to take to move to a level 3. We know that a lot of companies want to work on these issues internally. Some may want additional advisory or consulting expertise, but the guide really helps the company, begin to understand how it can implement different business process to mature its systems. We've worked with companies around the world in multiple languages, and we think this is a very effective way to really get a company started, to help a company identify its gaps, to help a company benchmark against others in its industry or others in its country. We have a great deal of information on our website that we urge you to take a look at. As Alan mentioned, we have the Create PwC report on trade secret theft on the website. We also have another report that gives you a good broad understanding of the different ways that companies' trade secrets are compromised. We also have some model policies that companies can implement in their employee code of conduct, in their vendor code of conduct with respect to protecting trade secrets. As Alan also mentioned, we have a paper on how to think about intellectual property in terms of enterprise risk management. This is a growing issue. There are many discussions happening both at the board level and the C-suite, how these issues must be integrated comprehensively across a company's risk management approach. We also have developed model IP policies more broadly across the various IP issues that a company should consider having in place, again, with its internal processes, with its employees, but also with its key third parties. And we have other white papers and other materials on the website. So we urge you to take available of this information. We will also distribute the slides to all those who registered for this webinar as well. And just to summarize, again, we think this is already happening. We think we're going to see more of this, where cybersecurity is a key part of a company's enterprise risk management. This would require a company to assess across, the cyber issues, where its greater risks are, and in particularly its greater risks to corporate digital assets. This then really, will require a company to understand the likelihood of a breach, the threat actors, who will be most likely to want to gain access to a company's confidential proprietary information, what is the most severe outcomes if that was to happen, and how do you plan against that? And of course, what assets require the most attention? How do you prioritize them? How do you classify them? And then most importantly, how do you secure them? So we'd love to take your questions. We know that's been a lot of information, a lot of content. As I mentioned, there's different white papers and reports and policies on our website that help reinforce all of this information. We'll definitely provide the slides to you. We're available by email should you have any additional questions. But if you've got questions now, we'd love to take them as well. I don't see any additional questions coming in. So let me thank you all for joining us today. Again, our email addresses are on the screen. If you have additional questions, we'd be pleased to answer them. And we look forward to you joining a future webinar in the weeks and months to come. Hope you have a great day. Thank you.